So, picture this. There's a country completely surrounded by the ocean. It's like one big island, right? And there's this particular area on the coast where people live, right by the sea. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Every now and then, a boat shows up. And when this boat drifts ashore, what do you find? An empty boat. No people, nothing. Just an empty vessel. But sometimes, it's even stranger. Inside these empty boats, you might find some odd things, like fish or small random objects. But here's the twist. Most of the time, what you actually find is a skeleton. Yes, an actual human skeleton. Skull, arms, legs, but no living person. Now, if this happened once or twice, you'd think it's just an accident. But then it starts becoming a pattern. Every few days, the same thing happens. Month after month, year after year, this cycle continues. An empty boat appears from the distant sea, bobbing with the waves, and when it finally reaches the shore, there's just a skeleton inside. No signs of life, just bones. This is the story of Japan, a country surrounded by the ocean where this bizarre phenomenon was happening. Specifically, along the northern coast of this island nation. This is a story that haunted the people of Japan for years, a strange tale that left the nation living in fear. To combat this terror, the Japanese government poured a lot of money into the issue because these boats appearing from the sea were far from ordinary. Imagine this. A boat emerges from the distant sea, but when it finally reaches the shore, there's no trace of human life on board. The strangest part, no one knows who's sending these boats or where they're coming from. It all began in a specific region of Japan, directly across from North Korea. Now, this was the early 2000s, and every other day a small boat would wash up on the shore. People would rush over thinking someone might need help. But when they arrived, all they'd find were skeletons. Slowly, word spread, and the Japanese authorities got involved. The big question was, how were these small, barely seaworthy boats managing to cross such a vast ocean? People started getting scared, and rumors spread that these boats were haunted, that this was the work of ghosts. The belief in these so-called ghost boats began to take hold. And the strangest part? These boats only came from the north. Out of all the vast oceans, this eerie journey of death always started from the northern side. As the mid-2000s rolled around, the phenomenon intensified, and more people began to believe it was the work of some supernatural force. By 2011, the situation had become even more serious. Around 57 of these ghost boats had washed up on the shores, and not a single living person was found aboard. In 2013, around 80 boats were found, and then in 2014, the number of these mysterious vessels reached 65. Year after year, these incidents increased, gradually forming a disturbing pattern. It's estimated that over 1,000 of these ghost boats have drifted into this area, fueling both fear and curiosity among the people. When the Japanese government realized that this issue was becoming extremely serious and that the public wanted answers, they finally launched a thorough investigation. During the investigation, some clues were found that pointed to a much bigger problem. For example, some of the boats were painted red on the outside, and others had markings in Korean, specifically referencing the Korean People's Army. This raised suspicions that something deeper was going on, and the Japanese government began taking this matter seriously. All the signs, all the clues, seemed to point toward North Korea. There were even notes and other evidence that confirmed this connection. Investigators concluded that these boats had indeed come from North Korea, but there was still doubt. Why? Because the distance between North Korea and Japan is roughly 1,000 kilometers. Crossing such a vast distance in a small, flimsy boat seemed almost suicidal. That's why the idea that someone from North Korea would attempt to reach Japan's coast in such a small vessel was hard to believe. But the investigation made it increasingly clear that all of this was connected to North Korea. These ghost boats seemed like desperate attempts, people risking their lives for reasons unknown. The idea of crossing such a vast distance in a small boat through the open sea just didn't make sense to most. Many people believed the government was just trying to fool them. There wasn't any concrete evidence, and this only added to the growing tension within the Japanese government. The arrival of these ghost boats not only made people afraid to go near the coast, but it also put pressure on the government during elections. They had to tighten coastal security. And then there was the cost. Retrieving those boats from the sea, transporting the bodies to hospitals, performing autopsies, it all started adding up. They also had to preserve the bodies in case they needed to be used for further investigations. Even arranging funerals for the bodies became a significant expense, eventually reaching into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Each time they found one of these boats, it meant more money. Lifting the boats, conducting autopsies, storing the bodies, and finally, either cremating or burying them. The whole process became a financial burden. For the Japanese authorities, the situation kept getting more complicated. On one hand, people were terrified, and on the other, the costs kept piling up. Strengthening coastal security became a necessity. Despite the efforts, posting guards and increasing security, people still couldn't understand what was really happening. By this point, investigators were certain that these events were linked to North Korea. But the biggest question remained: how could they prove that these small boats were actually coming from North Korea and managing to survive the rough journey across the sea to Japan? By 2013 to 14, after a thorough investigation, it became clear that ghost boats had first been spotted near North Korea's coast around 1975. This eerie phenomenon had been ongoing for about 35 or 36 years, with countless boats washing ashore during that time. As the investigation dug deeper, it was discovered that the pattern had become even more prominent between 1977 and 1983. During this period, ghost boat activity around North Korea's coastal areas increased significantly. And something else happened during that time. 17 Japanese citizens mysteriously disappeared near that coastal area. These were people who lived in small communities near the coast. Among the missing were even police officers who had been on duty near the coast. Despite investigations, no solid evidence or trace of them was ever found. This was a time when strange things were happening in the area, and people were trying to make sense of it all. The investigation continued, and then in 1985, a Japanese official spotted a man acting suspiciously on the northern coast and arrested him. When they checked his passport and identification, they found that his name was Tadaaki Hara. Upon further investigation, it was revealed that this man was one of the 17 people who had gone missing years earlier. This news gave Japanese officials a glimmer of hope. They thought that if Tadaaki Hara was alive, then maybe the other 16 missing people could still be alive too. They believed that through him, they might be able to find the others. But when they started questioning Tadaaki, the story that unfolded was completely different, something they never expected. It turned out that the passport Tadaaki Hara was carrying didn't even belong to the real Tadaaki. In reality, this man was a North Korean spy who had somehow gotten hold of the passport and made his way to Japan. This revelation hit like a bombshell. Imagine one of the missing 17's passports in the hands of a North Korean spy. This confirmed that it was all part of North Korea's game. After this major breakthrough, the investigation intensified. When they questioned the man posing as Tadaaki Hara, he eventually confessed. He admitted that North Korea had systematically kidnapped those 17 people, one by one, and taken them to North Korea. But this wasn't just about kidnapping, it was part of a larger strategy. North Korea wanted these people to train their spies in the Japanese language, to teach them how to look and sound like native Japanese, so they could easily infiltrate Japan. This was all because relations between North Korea and Japan were extremely tense at the time. So between 1977 and 1983, North Korea systematically kidnapped 17 Japanese citizens at different times and took them to their country. The goal was to have these people teach Japanese to North Korean spies so they could infiltrate Japan more effectively. All of this happened under the leadership of Kim Jong-il. When this truth came to light, Japan escalated the issue to the international stage. The pressure became so intense that in 2002, Kim Jong-il finally admitted that it wasn't just 17, but 59 Japanese people who had been taken to North Korea. But that was just the beginning. As these revelations came out, the investigations became even more intense. The next big question was, what's the connection to these ghost boats? Slowly, the story behind these boats began to emerge, and the full truth was revealed. North Korea had always wanted to spy on Japan, but the problem was that crossing the 1,000-kilometer distance by sea wasn't easy. Using small boats was incredibly risky, and using larger ships meant drawing Japan's attention, increasing the risk of getting caught. During this time, a major fish trade was booming. This trade took place in the waters between North Korea, China, and Japan. The target was a fish called the flying squid, which was in high demand, especially in China. People were willing to do anything to catch these fish. The Chinese had a particular fondness for this fish, and the trade grew so much that the population of these fish in the ocean began to decline. It was estimated that the population of these fish had decreased by 70% due to the immense demand. With the rising demand, people started using smaller boats for fishing. China, North Korea, and Japan each continued this trade in their respective waters. But beneath the surface, there was another story hidden within the waves. As fishing demand increased and fish populations dwindled, China deployed large fishing ships into the ocean. They began sending their ships right up to North Korea's maritime boundary. Now, we all know that North Korea and China are allies, but this friendship was somewhat one-sided. It's said that China paid North Korea, and in return, North Korea allowed Chinese ships into their waters to fish. This deal had a profound impact on North Korean fishermen, who relied on small boats for their livelihood. The large Chinese ships dominated the fishing grounds, leaving little for the North Korean fishermen. These small-time fishermen, who once managed to scrape by, found their lives becoming increasingly difficult. They would venture out in their small boats, trying to catch fish, but their catch was no longer enough to survive. In this desperate situation, some North Korean fishermen decided to take even greater risks. They pushed their small boats farther out into the deep sea, a journey that was truly suicidal. But they needed money to survive, and fishing was their only option. So, these fishermen set out in their small boats, but due to violent storms and strong waves, they lost their way. Stranded in the vast ocean, they drifted and eventually ended up on Japan's coast. The condition of these boats was tragic. Either the people on board had died, or they never made it back home. They left with limited supplies, water, food, everything in small quantities. When the ocean struck hard, these tiny boats would eventually wash up on Japan's shores. And that's how the eerie phenomenon of ghost ships began. These boats, once a means of livelihood for fishermen, now became a grim message of death, arriving unbidden on Japan's coastline. The United Nations Security Council launched an investigation into the matter, and Japan assembled a team to examine all the evidence. International journalists and UN officials delved deep into the issue and discovered that large Chinese fishing ships had encroached into North Korea's maritime areas. As a result, North Korean fishermen, in their small boats, lost their way in the vast ocean, and many of them perished. China's large-scale fishing operations left the North Korean fishermen stranded in the middle of the sea, intensifying tensions between North Korea and Japan. China's reports also highlighted the impact of the fishing industry and how North Korea struggled to manage these boats. After the report was released, North Korea acknowledged that these ghost ships belonged to their impoverished fishermen who were wandering the seas in search of a livelihood. North Korea also understood that these boats had cost the lives of their own people. They searched for their missing citizens and even shared some reports and photos. Today, 39 years later, when people on Japan's coast see these ghost ships, they realize they aren't just haunted vessels. They were filled with people just like them, forced to wander the sea in desperation. This is the story of the ghost ships, a tale that teaches us how necessity and the struggle for survival can cast life in a new light.